Hello and welcome to today's HathiTrust Community Week session titled Locating Common Forms of Historical Primary Sources in the HathiTrust Digital Library. I'm Christina Hall, Copyright Review Program Manager for HathiTrust, and I use she, her pronouns. Next slide, please. I'm going to go over a little housekeeping before we get started. First, I want to take a minute to remind everyone that HathiTrust events adhere to our member meeting and community week code of conduct, which is on our website and will also be posted into the chat shortly. Next slide. A quick tech overview of the Zoom features for you today. Aaron Elkis will be providing technical support for this session. So if you're having any technical issues, you can send a private chat message to Aaron and Aaron will try to assist you. This session is being recorded and we plan to post the recording on our YouTube channel. And we will also email you a link of the recording and slides after the presentation. Next slide, please. Of the Zoom features, you have been muted on entry, and since we do not have any live discussion planned for today, please keep your cameras off and your microphone muted for today's presentation. With the Zoom viewing controls, you can also adjust how the slides and presenters appear on your screen, and you can also make the slides larger by dragging the vertical frame divider. So try out different views and find which one works best for you. Please type your questions into the chat throughout the presentation. I will read the questions out loud to the presenter after the presentation is done. Closed captioning transcript is available for this presentation. If you look on the bottom, you can turn that on for yourself. And a link to the slides should already be posted in chat if you want to follow along on the slide deck. Next. This is just a quick look of how to mute or unmute yourself, and we ask that you stay muted through this presentation. Next slide. And then that is what the chat window looks like, and that would be where you type your questions if you have any throughout the presentation. And the last slide, please. We have some social media discussions going on a Slack community and also on Twitter. If you are not yet on the Slack space and want to be added, you can send a message to the general HathiTrust email and ask to be added to that Slack channel. So now I'm going to turn it over to Eamon Duffy. He coordinator and liaison librarian for history, classical studies, and government information at McGill University to go ahead and start our session. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Christina. So again, my name is Eamon, and today's presentation on locating common forms of primary sources in the HathiTrust Digital Library. It's mainly aimed at reference librarians, people who are sitting at a reference desk or virtual reference desk, and have undergraduate students coming to you asking to help them find primary sources. I'm a history librarian and I do this quite frequently. So what I wanted to do is share a strategy that I use a lot with the HathiTrust Digital Library. So today is really just a short practical presentation on effectively using HathiTrust to locate these types of documents. As far as an outline goes, I'll just start with a quick discussion of what primary sources are when we talk about history, their place within historical research, and then pay some attention to the issues that undergraduates can sometimes run into when they're trying to find primary sources. I'll talk about HathiTrust as kind of a major repository of full-text documents from the 19th century in particular, so it's a very deep collection of primary source material. And finally, I'm going to show the HathiTrust search interface, how it and the metadata options you have can facilitate finding and identifying useful primary sources. So as far as what a primary source is, when we're talking about history, well, it really can be anything. It really depends on the situation. But by and large, we're talking about documents that are written or produced during the events that a student is studying or the time period that's under study, and which gives some sort of firsthand evidence from the past. These are really the building blocks of any serious scholarly research. We can't just use what other historians have written. We really need to use what direct evidence from the past if we're going to make any kind of informed or credible argument about the past. So undergraduates often are coming to this for the first time, and this is the very first time that they're working with these sources and can have some trouble. Common suggested types. So, when students are usually encouraged by their professors, they're referred to these types of documents when they're asked to locate primary sources. So things like diaries that may describe certain events, travel narratives, in case somebody may have traveled through an area and described the society or witnessed an event. Collections of letters for the same reasons. Also, laws and government documents come up if somebody's looking at the way legal situation changed, or governments often produce major investigations and reports on societal issues or historical events. Also have statistics, obviously, things like the census and any number of surveys which give us a snapshot of what things were like in the past, and newspaper articles. So these are fairly frequently, these are what students are pointed to, and it's often easier said than done for them to locate. The frequent issues that they have are so often it'll be lack of foreign language skills. If they're looking at taking a course that's looking at the history of an area of the world where they don't speak the language, often it's really hard to find translations for a lot of these things. So that's one issue that they run into. They can have vocabulary issues, things that, the way we refer to something or events now isn't always the way that it was referred to in the past. So they need to get that kind of knowledge. And then things that are come up in any number of different situations where students are searching, especially a full text collection like HathiTrust, they're getting overloaded by results, and they can just be overwhelmed by sometimes even irrelevant results that they're encountering, and it's very frustrating. One big thing that one of the major ones is just the difficulty in understanding how to search for a primary source. They'll come and say, I've been told to find letters, but how do I do that? I can't really conceive of how to do that. So just getting started is difficult. And finally, just the idea that a good primary source isn't necessarily about what the student's paper is about. It could be just a couple pages of a source that are going to be relevant to the student's work, and because of that, none of the metadata like a title or subject headings pick these up often. So it's also trying to get to things through other means than just the metadata. So I guess those are the background as to what students are looking for and the problems that they have. And I'll just pivot to the HathiTrust as a database. So this is what I use very frequently for 19th century questions. So the way I approach it, the digital library isn't, for me, it's not a repository or like a preservation platform or even like a collective project. For me, it's just like a super collection of books, kind of like early English books online, 18th century collections online. You could search those for earlier events, but for me, HathiTrust Digital Library is the 19th century kind of major primary source database. So that's how I approach it. And it's probably, as far as I know, the biggest single source of 19th century documentation in one kind of repository. So this is kind of a means of highlighting this. In the digital library, there are over 1.25 million 19th century titles, and about 700,000 of those are in English. And this is as a point of comparison, the 19th century short title catalog, which attempted to list all of the English language sources published in the world during that century. There's 1.2 million entries in that catalog. So it just shows you that a vast amount of potential sources from the 19th century can be found in the HathiTrust. So now I'm going to pivot to a case, kind of a case study. And this is one that it came up in real life. I had a student who was looking for primary sources, on what the working conditions were in guano mines in Peru in the 19th century. So guano was a very important source of fertilizer. It's a huge international commodity at the time. And the mines were these islands off the coast of Peru where all these bird droppings would collect. So that's essentially what they would use for fertilizer in the 19th century. And the working conditions were quite bad. So the student wanted to get some firsthand knowledge of what it was like to work in conditions. So some of the issues this student had was, well, they didn't speak Spanish, which is, this took place in Peru. And also they were already aware that most of the workers were imported Chinese labor, and probably they wouldn't have left behind any kind of written record. So they're really struggling as to how they could go about this. So what I've got here in this screenshot is just a keyword search that we probably did something like this to start off, where we're just looking in the full text of the digital library for guano, Peru, and then some sort of mention of mine or miners. And we limited it to just 40 years, 1830 to 1870. And as you can see, there are almost 30,000 results. Some of these would be relevant, but many of them weren't and aren't. And really, there's just too many to go through. It's just too frustrating for the student. It's just very bewildering. So I just want to point out two things. One, it just shows you, how deep the amount of material is in the HathiTrust Digital Library. It seems like an arcane subject, but we're getting, quite a few thousand hits here. So how do we remedy this? How do we get the student from 29,000 to something that they can work with? And how do they pull out the more relevant things in here? Because most of them actually weren't relevant because they were agriculture books on how to use guano on your farm, government documents about there were wars fought over these islands because of people wanted access to the materials there. So that's not what they wanted. They really wanted to get kind of on the ground, somebody working. So what we did was, and this is kind of the strategy I'm trying to demonstrate here, is we went back to kind of more traditional ways of getting to those common types of primary sources that I mentioned earlier, and that's through Library of Congress subject heading subdivisions. So there's a group of 7 free-floating subdivisions are called. So these can kind of go in. These can be subdivisions of many different major topics, and they're not topical words. They're more like format or genre terms. So we have biography, which includes autobiography, correspondence for collections of letters, description and travel would be travel narratives. Then, of course, diaries, interviews, personal narratives is another type of subheading. It's also used in mesh subject headings, and sources, which is what is used when there's an anthology published later. Somebody anthologizes a bunch of primary sources. So in the past, so we might say to a student, well, try to find all, if we can't, you can't read Spanish, but maybe some Anglophone, a traveler from an Anglophone country went to Peru at the time and wrote a travel narrative and maybe described what they saw in a guano mine. So in the past, if somebody might have to look at all the Peru description and travel books that fall under that subject heading and just kind of hope to find something. And for an undergraduate, they just don't have the time and they're just really not going to do that. But what we can do is use this along with the full text search we tried before to try to bridge the two together and in a sense, limit our search to a certain type of primary source using these subdivisions and then entering our keywords that we want to see inside. So what I'll do now is demonstrate what I'm talking about here. By going inside the digital library. So I guess the main strength of the digital library is the fact that there are two ways of searching. You got the full text search here, which is the default, but every book that gets put into the repository, into the HathiTrust Digital Library, comes with a MARC record. It comes with a catalog record. So there's a library metadata involved as well. It's funny here that says, should I search catalog or full text? And what I'm going to show you is we're going to search both at the same time. And the way to do that is through this module here, which is called the Advanced Full Text Search. So what you can do here is you can break down your search into different parts here. So I'll put the words that I want to find inside my travel narrative. So guano and different permutations of mine or minor. I could have truncated, but I didn't want to find mineral, so we left that out. And then with the pull-down menu here, we can choose a subject. So we're looking in Library of Congress subject headings. And we'll choose Peru description and travel. So that's limiting it to travel narratives that mention Peru. And then if we go further down, we can do things like change the date parameters. So the first example where we got almost 30,000, we were only looking at this 40-year period from 1830 to 1870. And there's other ones here you could do. You could limit by language if you wish. But I'll show you the results of this search are much better. So we've got only 68 results, which is much easier for a student to go through. And if we take the first example here, the title of this book, I mentioned before, not every good primary source is about what the student is going to write their paper about. This title looks rather mundane. It's just Melbourne. So this is partly it's about Australia. You might think if you read the title. But we go inside the book. If we look at the full view, we can then go inside and say, well, we know that this book contains some mention of guano or guano mines. Let's take a look and see where those are by searching in the text. And we found this ended up being the major source the student used. But there are very detailed descriptions of the operations of the mine, the people working there. There were horrible conditions. They were basically, slaves almost, working in these mines. And the student was able to be able to document this for their paper using this approach. So this was, a case study in one example, but you can use it in many different other situations just by combining those free-floating subdivisions with any kind of topical keyword you may have or the student might have. And I'm going to go back to my slides here. Just before we wrap up, I want to leave some time for questions. Things to consider. I actually wrote an article kind of outlining this strategy a few years ago, and at the time I was curious to know how many records in the HathiTrust catalog actually have subject headings, because it's not a required field. And there were, at that time, I'm assuming it's continued to be about that, but it was 75%. So a good chunk of them have this, have subject headings, but just to note that when you do this strategy, there's 1/4 of potentially of the entire collection that's not being searched, because you're specifying, you're looking for a subject heading, and 25% of things don't have them. The other thing is this method works. I talked about the 19th century, but often it's because I use it for the 19th century because we can get access out of copyright. But it does work well for in-copyright material. So 20th century type of research. The only difference is you won't be able to see the full text of the item or the title, but it will tell you if you search inside the text that a word appears, a certain number of times, and that would give the student an idea that, maybe they should track this print book down. Hopefully it's in their collection, but if not, they could get it through interlibrary loan. So it can be used even though the full text is not available in some cases. And that's all I really had to say. It was a very short demonstration, but I'd welcome any questions that anybody has.
Thank you, Eamon. I can say that the staff were very actively chatting on Slack during your presentation going, how does that work? Has anybody tried that lately? Do we know if it does Boolean? And so we were quickly looking up the directions that we have on our help page. So it's great to hear from somebody who's actually been working with students teaching it. If anyone has questions, please put them into the chat. I also did put a link to Eamon's article from 2014 in the chat as well. I see one from Micah saying, given materials still in copyright, is there a reason to use HathiTrust Digital Library over WorldCat?
I guess yes, I mean, the main the value to using the HathiTrust is even if it's in copyright, you can still search the full text. So you can't see it, but you can still search the full text of a book that's published, even if it was published last year and it's in HathiTrust, you could still search the text inside. So if you put in keywords, it will only pull up in the results those books where those words appear. So even if HathiTrust at that point won't be able to give you something to look at and to use, it does point you in the direction of something that that you can print, you track down and print, hopefully in your collection or through interlibrary loan.
Kathy says that it's very helpful to learn about mixing full text search with subject terms. Oh, and Jessica shared a link to our search tips from the website as well. Heather asks, do you offer training on how to search HathiTrust in general? I suppose that would be at McGill. Do you offer?
I've never taught it as a standalone workshop. However, it's when I do in-class presentations in history courses at McGill, it's something that I do show. Any kind of, for me, this, as I said before, when I kind of conceptualize the HathiTrust as a 19th century database, so it's taught a lot. Yeah.
Amy asks, is there any crossover when searching in Google Scholar to Hathi content?
That's a good question. I actually don't know. I don't think, I mean, there may be overlap, things that would come up in Google Books. The Google Books content that would be in both Google Books and HathiTrust we'd find them. I don't know about cross-searching, and the library metadata certainly wouldn't be there. So I guess the answer is no.
John says, I've used this method to help students in history, but I don't think I'd applied LCSH terms in Hathi. Very helpful, thank you. Catherine says, thank you for these helpful tips. It seems like a good way to approach building HathiTrust curated collections. And actually, I was thinking of that too while you were talking, and that you can curate a collection for your students, and actually the collection will be indexed. And so you can confine the searching just to that collection, which is a bit helpful also it's kind of like pre-vetting things that the students might use.
That's great.
I hope I'm not skipping any. Scott asks, would the 25% of HathiTrust catalog records that lack any LCSH heading be mostly works of fiction, since those are less likely to have been assigned subject headings? I don't think you'd be able to answer that, but our staff might know. We'll see if we can get an answer to that one. And Catherine mentions that to building a collection could become a worksheet for computational analysis via HTRC tools too, a work set, right. So it works, I believe collections can now be passed over as work sets for digital humanities kind of computational analysis in the HathiTrust Research Center as well. So there's a back and forth bonus to building a collection. We have a little more time left if anyone else has questions or comments. It seems like this is an area where people could be sharing advice on the HathiTrust community Slack channel. So I'm hopeful that you all will hop over there and start sharing your tips and your successes. I believe Natalie is coming up with an answer for Scott's question about the records lacking LCSH headings.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know as well. That'd be good info.
Well, I am going to go ahead and stop the recording now, and I will stay on if anyone else has additional questions. And thank you so much, Eamon. It was great to hear your presentation and interesting how you've worked with students to use the resources available in HathiTrust for doing primary source research. So thank you.
Thank you.